She had not seen her daughter's face in 26 years, not since the night she was born, not since the lights went out inside her head and never came back on. She gave her daughter life, and that birth took her sight. She never blamed her, not once. Not even on the night Vivian stood at their front door, looked straight through her mother, and told her friend, with a voice so steady it did not even shake, that Idoreen was not her mother, that she was just a blind witch who lived in their house. Her name was Idoreen, and this is the story of the longest silence between a mother and her child. A silence born in a delivery room, grown inside a daughter who was ashamed of what her mother had become, and finally broken by a truth neither of them saw coming. This is a story worth staying with, because what it reveals is going to change the way you think about the things we hide from the people we love. There are things we never tell our children about the price we paid to bring them into the world. We carry those costs quietly, the way a river carries weight beneath a still surface, invisible from above, crushing at the bottom. And sometimes, when a parent decides to protect a child from a painful truth, they do not realize that the silence being poured around that truth is not a cushion. It is a container, and what grows inside a sealed container, in the dark, without air, does not stay small. How does a mother lose her sight in a delivery room and still choose, every single morning after that, to love the child who was born in that same room, without conditions and without complaint? How does a daughter grow up watching her mother navigate every doorway by memory, count steps from the kitchen to the bathroom by routine, recognize every family member by the sound of their footsteps on a wooden floor, and still decide that the most important thing, the thing worth protecting at any cost, was what her school friends might think? And what does a father do when he finally understands that the truth he locked away in a drawer to protect his family has not been sitting there quietly all this time, but has been feeding on the silence and becoming something none of them were prepared for? 3 questions, 1 family, and a front door on a Saturday afternoon in November that cracked all 3 of them open at the same moment. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We love hearing from our viewers all around the world, and if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, please do it now. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. To understand what happened to this family, you first have to understand who Idoreen was before the night everything changed. And that means going back, not to the hospital, not yet, but to a time before hospitals and decisions and consequences. Back to the woman herself, the one who existed before the darkness, the one who had plans and laughter, and a very specific idea about what her life was going to look like. Idoreen grew up in the American South, the third of 5 children in a family that did not have much money, but had a great deal of structure. Her father worked maintenance for the county school district. Her mother cleaned houses on the north side of town 3 days a week, and ran their own household with the kind of efficiency that never required a written list. Idoreen learned early that you showed up, you did the work, you did not complain about what you did not have, and you made something from whatever was in front of you. Those were not lessons she was taught in any formal sense. They were lessons she absorbed from watching 2 people live them every single day. She was bright in school, not the kind of bright that announces itself loudly, but the quieter kind. The kind that teachers notice, because the questions she asked were never the ones on the worksheet. She had a particular gift for language, for putting words together in ways that felt both precise and alive. By the time she was in high school, she was writing for the school paper and dreaming, with the specific kind of urgency that teenagers carry, of becoming a journalist. She wanted to tell stories. She wanted to be the person who found the truth that other people had buried and brought it into the light where everyone could see it. The irony of that dream, and the life that followed her, is not lost on anyone who knows how her story ends. She met Raymond when they were both 24. He was working in logistics, managing freight routes for a regional shipping company. He was not flashy. He was not the loudest man in a room, or the most immediately impressive. He was steady. He was the kind of man who, when he said he would do a thing, did it. Not eventually, not when he felt like it, but on the schedule he had committed to. Idoreen, who had grown up watching exactly this quality in her father, and had recognized it as the most underrated thing a person could offer another person, saw Raymond clearly from the start. They dated for 2 years. They were engaged for 1. They married in a church in her hometown on a Saturday morning in late spring, with both families present, and a reception that went until the hall closed at midnight. The first 3 years of their marriage were quiet and full. They rented a house in a neighborhood that was not the one they ultimately wanted, but was clean and manageable and had a good school 2 streets over, which mattered to both of them for reasons that were still theoretical at that point. Idoreen had set aside the journalism dream, not abandoned it, she always said, just deferred, and was working in communications for a mid-sized nonprofit. Raymond had been promoted twice. They were building something. They both felt it. That particular feeling of a life taking the shape you intended for it. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but recognizably. The shape you drew in your mind when you were young enough to believe that the shapes you drew would hold. When Idoreen became pregnant, she was 29 years old. She found out on a Tuesday morning, alone in the bathroom of their house, before Raymond had left for work. She stood there for a long time looking at the result without calling him. Not because she was afraid, and not because she was not overjoyed. She was, immediately and completely. But because she wanted 1 full minute of holding it alone, before it became something they shared. 1 minute, where it was entirely hers. And then she walked out of the bathroom and into the kitchen, where Raymond was eating toast and standing at the counter, and she put the test down on the counter beside his coffee cup without saying a word. Raymond looked at it, put down his phone, and then sat down very slowly on the kitchen stool, like his legs had stopped working, and covered his face with both hands. He did not cry loudly. He just sat there with his face covered, shoulders slightly shaking, for a long moment, and when he took his hands away, his eyes were red, and his expression was something no single word has ever been found to fully describe. The pregnancy was uneventful, as pregnancies go. Idoreen was careful. She attended every scheduled appointment. She stopped drinking coffee at 12 weeks, which was harder than she expected, and which Raymond found quietly amusing, in a way that kept him from saying so directly. She read books. She asked her mother questions on the phone on Sunday evenings. She put her hand on her stomach in the dark before she went to sleep every night, and talked to the child inside her, the way you talk to someone you have not met yet, but are already completely certain you will love. She was 29 years old and she was healthy, and her blood pressure had always been fine, and there was absolutely no reason, not a single clinical indicator, not a shadow on any scan, not a number out of range on any test result, to believe that anything was going to go wrong. The labor started on a Tuesday evening in late March. Idoreen had just sat down to eat dinner when the first contraction came, strong enough that she set her fork down and put both hands on the table and breathed through it the way she had read to breathe. She waited for the next one. It came 14 minutes later, then 11, then 9. Raymond had the hospital bag in the car by the time the gap was 7 minutes, and the contractions had developed a quality that was no longer academic. They were in the car and on the way within the hour. The hospital received her at just past 9 in the evening. She was admitted quickly. Her blood pressure on intake was slightly elevated, 140/92, and the admitting nurse noted it without alarm. Mildly elevated blood pressure in late labor is not unusual. It is managed. It is monitored. Idoreen was assigned a room and a nurse and a plan, and Raymond sat in the chair beside the bed with his hand over hers, and the night moved forward the way labor nights do, in waves of intensity separated by stretches of waiting, the body doing its ancient, brutal, necessary work. What the doctors would explain to Raymond hours later, in the corridor outside, in the way that doctors speak when they are giving information that the person being spoken about is not yet well enough to receive, was that at approximately 11:40 in the evening, Idoreen's blood pressure had spiked to a level that triggered a cascade of responses that the medical team worked quickly to manage, but could not fully prevent. The exact mechanism, whether it was a hypertensive crisis consistent with severe preeclampsia or something in the vascular system of her eyes that had never been detected, is something Idoreen herself spent years trying to understand and has largely made peace with not fully understanding. What she knows, what she carries, is the outcome, not the mechanism. The outcome is not a thing you can research your way out of. According to documented medical cases involving pregnancy-related vision loss, severe hypertension during childbirth can trigger acute bilateral visual loss, resulting from retinal artery occlusion or cortical damage, linked to extreme elevation in blood pressure. In rare but documented cases, this vision loss is permanent. The American Academy of Ophthalmology has published case studies of women who woke from the most physically intense experience of their lives to find the light simply gone, not dimmed, not blurred, not something that would improve with rest or time or medication. Gone. And Idoreen became one of those women at 11:47 in the evening on a Tuesday in late March, in the same moment that her daughter, Vivian, arrived in the world at 6 pounds 9 ounces, crying with the particular fury of the newly born. Idoreen does not remember the delivery itself. She remembers the ceiling tiles. She remembers a nurse telling her to push. She remembers Raymond's hand, and then the absence of Raymond's hand as the room became louder and more urgent around her. And then she remembers nothing until the following morning, when she woke to a room that was completely, entirely dark. She lay still for a moment, not yet alarmed, assuming it was very early, assuming the lights were off. She reached for the bedside lamp in the direction she thought it should be. Her hand found nothing. She reached in the other direction. Still nothing. She called Raymond's name. He was there immediately. He said her name, and she said, "Raymond, why is it so dark in here?" Raymond did not answer right away, and in the pause before he answered, Idoreen already knew. She has said this many times since. She knew in the pause, the way you sometimes know a thing in the silence before someone says it, because the silence itself has a shape, and the shape of it is not the shape of good news. Raymond cried for the second time in their marriage that morning. The first time had been over a positive pregnancy test in their kitchen, holding something they had wanted. The second time was in a hospital room in the dark, trying to find the words to tell his wife that the wanting and the having had cost her more than either of them had known it would. They went home 12 days later. 12 days, because the doctors needed to be certain of what they were dealing with, needed to exhaust every possibility, needed to be sure they were not missing something reversible before delivering the full weight of what they were telling her. Whether spending 12 days in a hospital bed in the dark hoping for a reversal that was never going to come was something that helped her, or whether it simply extended the period before she had to begin learning to live in the life she actually had, instead of the one she had expected. Vivian came home the same day. Raymond's mother had been staying at the house, caring for the baby while both parents were at the hospital. When Idoreen came through the front door, slowly, Raymond's hand on her elbow, every step careful in a way no step had ever needed to be careful before in this house that she knew, that she had moved through for 3 years without ever having to think about where things were. Raymond's mother placed Vivian in her arms, and Idoreen held her daughter for the first time. She ran her hands over the baby's face, over the curve of the forehead, the small, slightly flattened nose, the closed fists, the warmth. Her hands shook. She wept. And then she did something that people who have heard this story remember long after everything else fades. In that moment, with Vivian in her arms and the darkness absolute around her, she did not feel loss. She felt arrival. She felt that something she had been waiting for had finally come, and the cost of its coming was real and enormous and hers to carry. But the thing itself, the weight of this child, the warmth, the smell, the small sounds, the thing itself was worth it. She did not decide this. She did not reason her way to it. It was simply what she felt. Raymond and Idoreen made a decision in those early weeks that would shape everything that followed. It was not a decision they discussed formally or arrived at together through any deliberate conversation. It was more like a mutual drift toward the same position, the way two people who know each other well sometimes arrive at a conclusion simultaneously without having to say it aloud. The decision was this. Vivian would not grow up under the weight of the story of her birth. She would not grow up knowing that the night she arrived in the world was the night her mother lost her sight. They would protect her from it, and so they simply never told her. This was not a constructed lie. They did not tell Vivian that Idoreen had lost her sight in an accident or an illness. They simply did not tell her the truth, and to a child growing up in that house, the absence of an explanation for her mother's blindness became, over time, simply the way things were. Vivian grew up knowing her mother could not see. She did not know why. And because she did not ask, and because no one offered, the silence settled into the foundation of the family like something structural, invisible, load-bearing, and completely unexamined. Vivian was, by every account, a bright and energetic child. She walked early, talked early, asked questions constantly, from the moment she had words to ask them with. She was social in the way some children simply are, drawn to other people, comfortable in groups, instinctively understanding of how rooms worked and what was expected in them. She made friends easily. She laughed easily. She was, in the years of her early childhood, close to Idoreen, in the uncomplicated way that young children are close to their mothers, without analysis, without condition, without the self-consciousness that comes later. Idoreen, for her part, learned her life again from the beginning. There is no other way to say it. She learned the layout of the house so thoroughly that she could walk it in any condition, at any time of night or day, without hesitation. She learned to cook by touch and memory and the smell of things. She learned to tell time by the sound of the neighborhood, the particular quality of traffic at different hours, the sound of school buses, the neighbor 2 doors down who mowed his lawn every Saturday morning at 8. She learned to identify her family members by the sound of their footsteps before they reached the room she was in. Raymond's step was even and deliberate. Vivian's, as she grew, was quick and slightly off balance, always in a hurry to get somewhere. Idoreen also learned the social architecture of her condition, who to ask for help and how to ask for it without making the person feel burdened, how to navigate spaces she had not been in before, how to manage the particular discomfort that sighted people sometimes feel in the presence of someone who cannot see. She became, without intending to, extraordinarily good at reading people, at hearing what was in a voice beneath the words being spoken, at understanding through sound and texture and temperature and the slight shift in air pressure when someone moved toward her, what a room full of sighted people had to see to know. Through all of this, Raymond was present. Raymond was consistent. Raymond held the household together with the same steady, unflashy reliability that Idoreen had recognized in him at 24 and had never once stopped being grateful for. He did not make Idoreen feel like a burden. He did not make Vivian feel responsible. He built a life around the new reality of their family, with a carefulness that looked, from the outside, like a very ordinary family, simply living their ordinary life. But underneath the ordinary, something was accumulating, something that neither Raymond nor Idoreen could see, and the particular weight of that fact, given the circumstances, is not something to pass over lightly. Vivian was growing up, and as she grew, she was absorbing things, not things that were said to her, things that were not said, the absence of explanation, the way certain conversations ended when she entered a room, the way Raymond sometimes steered her away from questions she was beginning to ask, the silence that sat where the origin story of her mother's blindness should have been. Children fill silences. That is one of the things they do most reliably, most inevitably. They do not leave gaps empty. They fill them with what they can construct from what they have, and what they have is limited and incomplete and shaped by their own fears and the particular cruelty of other children who notice things that adults think they are hiding. The first time Vivian experienced shame about her mother's blindness, in a way that registered in the household, not seen but felt, she was 9 years old. She had brought a friend home from school, a girl named Cassie, whose family had recently moved to the neighborhood. Cassie was curious about everything, moving through the house with the unself-conscious appraisal of someone for whom manners around other people's spaces had not yet been fully established. She had asked, with complete innocence, why Idoreen was not watching the television that was on in the living room, and Vivian had answered, very quickly, too quickly, in a voice slightly too loud, that her mother just did not like that particular program, and they could go to Vivian's room now. Idoreen had heard it. She had heard the quickness of it, the slight scramble, the redirect. She had turned it over in her mind afterward, quietly, the way she turned many things over that she did not bring to Raymond, and she had decided it was nothing. She had decided that Vivian was 9, and children at 9 were still working out the social rules, and she had handled it the best she could in the moment, and it was not anything to make large. She made that decision 4 or 5 more times over the following years. Each time something happened that might have been the beginning of something, she decided it was nothing. She was wrong each time. She was wrong in the way that people who love someone completely are often wrong about the signs that something is accumulating. Not because they are unintelligent, not because they are not paying attention, but because love, particularly the unconditional love of a mother, does not want to look at evidence that requires it to think badly of the one it loves. Idoreen did not want to look at evidence that her daughter was ashamed of her, so she did not look at it. She turned it over, examined it briefly, and put it down. By the time Vivian was in middle school, the shame had taken on a specific shape. It lived in particular situations. School events, neighborhood gatherings, anything where Vivian would be visible alongside her mother to people whose opinion she cared about. Idoreen was never invited to these events, not explicitly excluded, not told she could not come, but simply never mentioned. The school sent home notices that appeared on the counter and then disappeared. Parent nights happened without her name being raised as a possibility. Vivian managed the school portion of her life with a completeness that left no gap for Idoreen to fit into. And the particular, deeply uncomfortable truth was that Idoreen was not a woman who was difficult to be around. She was not strange in the ways that children fear their parents might be strange. She was articulate and warm, and she had a sense of humor that was dry and precise, and that adults tended to appreciate immediately. She was not visibly struggling in public. She had been navigating the world without sight for nearly a decade by the time Vivian was in middle school, and she was, in the truest sense, competent. A stranger meeting Idoreen for the first time would not think, "This woman is a problem." They would think, "This is a woman worth talking to." The only thing a stranger would have noticed was the white cane, and the white cane was the thing Vivian could not get past. Not what it meant to her mother's life. Not what her mother had survived to be standing there with it. Just the cane itself, the visibility of it, the fact that it announced, to anyone looking, that something was different. Research on children of disabled parents has documented this pattern with a consistency that makes it both understandable and heartbreaking. Children who grow up with parents who have visible disabilities often experience what psychologists describe as a form of social anxiety rooted not in the disability itself, but in the perceived stigma of it. They are not, in most cases, ashamed of their parent as a person. They are afraid of what association with difference might cost them socially, afraid of the questions they cannot answer, afraid of the pity or the curiosity or the cruelty that other children are sometimes not careful enough to hide. This fear does not make them bad children. It makes them frightened ones. But the difference between a bad child and a frightened one is not always visible from the outside, and it is almost never visible to the parent absorbing the consequences. The PTA meeting happened when Vivian was 17 years old and in her junior year of high school. Raymond had a work commitment he could not reschedule, a quarterly review that had been fixed in the calendar for months. Idoreen told Vivian, without preamble, that she would attend the meeting in Raymond's place. She said it the way she said most things, matter-of-factly, with the quiet confidence of a woman who had long since stopped asking permission for ordinary things. She was Vivian's mother. Parents attended school meetings. She would attend this one. What followed was not a shouting match. There was no raised voice. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways harder to absorb because of the quiet. Vivian went still. Then she said, carefully, that it was not necessary. She said the meetings were administrative, and nothing of consequence would be decided. She said Idoreen did not need to trouble herself with it. Idoreen said that she wanted to go, that she was Vivian's mother, and she had every right to be at a meeting about her daughter's school. And Vivian, 17 years old, looked at her mother, looked at a woman who could not see the expression on her daughter's face, a fact that is its own particular weight to carry, and said, I don't want you there because you'll embarrass me. I've been managing how people see our family for a long time, and I need you to let me keep managing it. Idoreen said nothing for a moment. Then she asked Vivian what, exactly, she had been managing. And Vivian said, the fact that you're blind. The fact that my mother is blind and I don't know what to say about it, and people look at us, and I don't know what they're thinking, and I can't handle it. Idoreen sat with that. She sat with it the way she sat with most things that required processing, quietly, in the chair by the window where the afternoon light came through and warmed one side of the room. She did not cry in front of Vivian. She waited until Vivian left the room, and then she sat in that chair in the warmth she could feel but not see, and she cried for a long time without making very much sound. And then she got up, and she made dinner, and she did not tell Raymond, and she did not go to the PTA meeting. There is a particular species of silence that families develop when something that needs to be said has been not said for long enough. It is not the silence of peace. It is not the silence of people who have nothing to say to each other. It is a functional silence. A silence that has been engineered to make ordinary life possible, despite the thing that sits in the middle of it that no one is naming. The Walker family had this silence. They were good at it. They had been practicing it, without knowing they were practicing it, since Vivian was a newborn, and Raymond and Idoreen made the unspoken decision not to tell her the truth. Vivian graduated from high school with honors. She went to a state university 4 hours away. She came home for holidays, and for a stretch of years the distance made things easier, in a way that neither mother nor daughter examined too closely. Vivian called regularly. She was not cold. She was not cruel. She simply existed in a life that was increasingly her own, a life that her mother was not a visible part of, and this seemed to suit something in her that she had not been able to fully articulate since she was 9 years old, and sent a friend to her room to get her away from a question she did not know how to answer. Idoreen understood this in the way she understood most things, not through sight, not through the facial expressions and body language that sighted people use to read the people around them, but through sound and pattern and the weight of absences. She knew when Vivian did not mention her in a story. She knew when a description of a weekend with friends ended before it got to the part where Vivian would have had to explain to someone new who her mother was and why she used a cane. She knew by what was not said, and she accepted it, the way she accepted many things, without complaint and without making it someone else's responsibility to fix. Raymond knew something was wrong between Idoreen and Vivian. He is not a man who misses the emotional temperature of his household. But knowing that something is wrong and knowing what to do about it are different things. And Raymond, in the way of people who have spent years protecting those they love from painful truths, was not sure how to insert himself into a wound he had, in some ways, helped to create. He did not know about the PTA meeting conversation. He did not know the specific words Vivian had used. He knew only that something between his wife and his daughter was not right, and that the years were not fixing it the way years sometimes fix things simply by passing. Vivian turned 26 on the third Saturday of November. They celebrated the week before, quietly, the way the Walker family marked most occasions. Raymond bought a cake from a bakery downtown, chocolate with cream cheese frosting, which had been Vivian's preference since childhood. Idoreen made her daughter's favorite meal from memory, a slow-cooked pot roast with the specific combination of herbs and vegetables that Vivian had asked for by name every birthday since she was old enough to have a preference. The three of them sat at the dining table and ate and talked about Vivian's work and the apartment she was looking at in a neighborhood she liked and the friend she had mentioned recently named Grace, who Vivian spoke of with the particular warmth that suggested Grace was more than a casual acquaintance. Idoreen listened to her daughter's voice over dinner. Listened, as she always did, with an attention that sighted people rarely bring to listening, because they are also looking, and the looking distributes their attention. She heard the animation in Vivian's voice when she talked about Grace. She heard the contentment underneath the surface of Vivian's life, the sense of someone who had built something she was satisfied with. And she heard, faintly, the same thing she had been hearing for years, the careful management, the way certain subjects were navigated around. The way Vivian's conversation, even at her own birthday dinner, had the quality of something that had been lightly edited before it reached the room. The following Saturday, Idoreen was home in the morning, and Raymond had gone to run errands, and Vivian was in her old bedroom, which she used when she visited, reading something on her phone by the sound of it, the particular silence of someone absorbed in a screen. Idoreen was in the kitchen, putting away dishes, moving through the space with the confidence of absolute familiarity, when she heard the gate at the front of the house open and then click shut. She heard footsteps on the front path. She heard Vivian's door open, quickly, as if she had been waiting, and then Vivian's footsteps, faster than usual, moving toward the front of the house. And then the front door opened. Grace's voice came through before anything else. Grace had a warm voice, the kind of voice that is immediately easy to be around, that has a natural openness in it, that makes you feel, before the first sentence is finished, that this is a person who is genuinely glad to be wherever she is. Grace said Vivian's name and there was the sound of an embrace, brief and warm, and then Grace said she was so excited to finally see the house, She had heard so much about it, and then she asked, and this is the moment, the exact moment where everything turned. She asked where Vivian's mom was. She said she had been wanting to meet her. She said Vivian had spoken about her mother, and she was looking forward to saying hello. Idoreen had stopped moving in the kitchen. She was standing very still, holding a bowl she had just taken down from the cabinet, not breathing in any meaningful way, waiting. The pause before Vivian answered was not long. 2 seconds, perhaps. 3 at most. But in a house where a woman who cannot see has spent 26 years listening to the things that happen in the spaces between words, 3 seconds is a very long time. And then Vivian spoke. Her voice was light, almost breezy, the voice she used when she was managing something and doing it well enough that no one could see the management underneath. And she said, "Oh, don't worry about her. That's not my mom. That's just the blind witch who lives in our house." There was a short laugh from Grace, brief and uncertain, the laugh of someone who is not sure whether what they have just heard is a joke with a punchline still coming, or something that is exactly what it sounded like. And Vivian said it again. The same words, the same light voice, steadier this time, as if repetition would convert it from a cruel thing into a casual one. Idoreen set the bowl down on the kitchen counter. She set it down carefully, which is worth noting, because careful was not what she felt. She felt something large and formless, and 26 years old moved through her chest in the space of about 4 seconds. She stood there for a moment, very still. In the kitchen she knew completely. In the house she could navigate with her eyes closed. She has had dark humor about that phrase, in the years since, and she understood something she had been knowing without fully knowing for a very long time. Vivian had not simply been ashamed of her mother in the way that teenagers are sometimes ashamed of their parents, that phase of social anxiety and separateness that most children eventually grow out of. Vivian had constructed an alternative version of her own life, a version in which Idoreen was not her mother, or was a figure so peripheral and so embarrassing that she needed to be narrated away from existence in the presence of someone Vivian cared about. This was not a phase. This was not adolescent difficulty that had simply run long. This was a practice story. Vivian had told this story, or stories like it, before. The ease with which it had come out, the lightness of it, the fact that it arrived as a fully formed, almost rehearsed thing, told Idoreen that. You do not speak that smoothly about something the first time you say it. She turned and walked down the hallway to her bedroom. She did not rush. She counted the steps the way she always counted them. Not because she needed to after 20 years in this house, but because the counting was a kind of anchor, a way of keeping her feet on the ground when the rest of her was somewhere else entirely. She went to the edge of the bed and she sat down. And she cried in a way she had not cried since the hospital, 26 years before. Not loudly, not with any performance in it, just the deep, structural crying of someone who has absorbed something they cannot give back. Raymond came home 2 hours later. Vivian and Grace had left by then. The front door had opened and closed, and the gate, and then silence had followed. Idoreen had been sitting in the chair by the window since she stopped crying, doing the thing she did when she needed to stay present, feeling the sun on her face, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, letting the immediate physical world hold her while the interior one settled. She told Raymond at the dinner table that evening. She told him everything, the PTA meeting conversation, which she had never told him, and then the front door conversation from that afternoon. She told him in the particular way she told difficult things, without drama, in order, with all the relevant details included, and nothing extraneous. Raymond listened without interrupting, which was his way. He sat very still across the table. When she finished, he did not speak for a long time, and then he said, "There is something I should have told her a very long time ago." Idoreen understood immediately what he meant. They had never discussed whether to tell Vivian directly. They had simply never told her, and the years had accumulated around the not telling until it had the weight and permanence of an actual decision, which it was, even if it had never been made consciously. Now Raymond was saying that the decision had been wrong. He was not saying it as an accusation. He was saying it as a man who had watched his family for years and had finally, in the silence that followed the story his wife had just told him, understood what the source of the damage was. The silence they had poured around the truth of Vivian's birth had not protected her. It had left her with a gap where the story should have been, and she had filled the gap with shame because there was nothing else available to fill it with. Raymond called Vivian that night and asked her to come back to the house the following morning. He did not tell her why. Vivian came, slightly wary in the way that adult children of careful parents become wary when summoned without explanation, and sat in the living room with her father at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, while Idoreen sat in the kitchen with the door partially open and listened. Raymond told Vivian the full story of the night she was born, not the softened version, not the version where things were difficult and then everything resolved, the real version, with all of its details and all of its weight. He told her about the blood pressure spike. He told her about the medical team and the corridor conversation, and the words the doctor had used when he explained that Idoreen's vision was not coming back. He told her about bringing Vivian home from the hospital 12 days later, this small new person who did not yet know that her arrival had changed everything, and placing her in Idoreen's arms. He told her what Idoreen had done in that moment, how she had run her hands over her daughter's face, over every feature, learning by touch what she would never be able to see. And then Raymond told Vivian the last thing, the thing he had been saving, the thing he had carried for 26 years and had always known, somewhere, that it would one day need to be said out loud. He told her that when Idoreen woke up in the hospital room in the dark and slowly understood what had happened to her, when the full weight of it became real, not abstract, not a thing doctors were preparing her for, but the actual permanent truth of her life from that moment forward, the first thing she had asked was not about herself. She had not asked what had happened to her eyes. She had not asked if it was permanent. She had not asked how they were going to live or what was going to change. The first thing she had said, before any of that, before she had fully processed what she had lost, was, "Is the baby all right?" And then she heard her daughter cry, not the short, uncertain sounds of someone caught off guard, but the deep, unguarded crying of someone who has just received a piece of information that has rearranged something fundamental in how they understand a story they thought they already knew. Vivian came to her mother's room without knocking. She crossed the room quickly. Idoreen heard her footsteps, recognized them as she had always recognized them, quick and slightly off balance, always in a hurry, and then she sat down on the floor beside Idoreen's chair. She did not say anything. She put her head against her mother's knee, the way she had not done since she was very small, and she cried without speaking. Idoreen put her hand on her daughter's hair. She did not say anything either. She has thought, many times since, about what could have been said in that moment, what the right words were, whether there were right words, whether anything that could have been spoken would have been equal to what the moment asked of it. She has decided there were no right words. There was only the hand on the hair and the sun through the window and the two of them in the room together, mother and daughter. 26 years of silences sitting around them like furniture that was finally being acknowledged. They stayed like that for a long time. Vivian cried herself to a stillness, and then sat quietly, her head still against her mother's knee. At some point, Vivian said, "I didn't know," and Idoreen said, "I know," and Vivian said, "I thought," and then she stopped and started again. "I thought you were just, I didn't understand," and Idoreen said, "I know that too." Vivian asked her mother why she had never told her, and Idoreen took the question seriously, the way it deserved, and said, "Because we wanted to protect you. Because your father and I thought that if you knew, you would carry something you were too young to carry. And then we waited too long, and the not telling became its own kind of wall, and we did not know how to take the wall down without everything falling on us. And she said, 'We were wrong. You deserve to know, and I am sorry that you did not.'" Vivian asked her mother one more question. She asked if Idoreen had ever been angry. Not at the situation, not at the hospital or the doctors or the biology of what had happened, but at Vivian specifically, at the fact that her birth was the cause of it. Had she ever, in 26 years, felt anger toward the daughter whose arrival cost her everything she had lost? Idoreen answered without hesitating. She said, "Not once, not one time in 26 years. She said, 'You were the thing asked about first. You were the first thing reached for in the dark. That has never changed.'" The reconciliation between Idoreen and Vivian did not happen in a single conversation. That is important to say, because the stories told about families that have broken and healed tend to give the healing a clean, decisive quality, that real healing does not have. Real healing is slower and less cinematic. It requires the same thing the wound required, which is time, but it also requires a willingness that the wound does not require. A willingness to stay present with someone through their discomfort and your own, to have conversations that are awkward and incomplete, to rebuild a trust that was not so much betrayed as simply never fully built to begin with. Vivian began coming home more often. Not for the holidays only, but on ordinary weekends. The kind of weekends with no occasion attached, which are the hardest kind to show up for, and also the most meaningful. She began calling Idoreen directly, rather than relaying information through Raymond. Small things at first. A story about something that had happened at work. A question about a recipe. A memory from childhood that she wanted her mother to confirm or expand on. And then, gradually, larger things. Her feelings about whether she should move apartments. Her uncertainty about a relationship and whether the person she was with wanted the same things she wanted. The kind of conversation that requires not just a listening ear, but a specific kind of listening. The kind that does not rush to fix or reassure, but simply holds the space for what is being said. Idoreen was good at that kind of listening. She had been, in many ways, preparing for it her entire adult life as a blind woman in a sighted world. The deep, full attention that comes from having stripped away visual distraction and learned to be completely present to what a voice is actually carrying. Vivian began to understand this about her mother. Began to understand that the things she had spent years trying to manage away from public view, the cane, the clouded eyes, the careful navigation of spaces, was not the sum of who Idoreen was. It was one part, and the other parts were large and real and had always been there, waiting to be seen by a daughter who was finally ready to look. Grace, for her part, reached out to Vivian a few days after the front door incident. She said she had been thinking about what happened, and she wanted to understand it better. Vivian told her the truth. All of it. The full story. The birth and the blindness, and the years of shame, and the conversation with Raymond, and the afternoon on the floor beside her mother's chair. Grace listened, and then she said something that Vivian has repeated to Idoreen more than once since. She said that she thought Idoreen sounded like someone she very much wanted to meet, and eventually she did. It is easy, in a story like this, to assign roles. To call Vivian the villain of it. To say she was a cruel daughter who shamed a woman who sacrificed everything for her, and to feel righteous about that judgment. That reading is available. But it is not the true one. Vivian was not a cruel child. Vivian was a frightened one. She grew up with a gap in the center of her understanding of her own family. A gap where the explanation for the most significant thing about her mother's life should have been. And she filled that gap with what children fill gaps with, which is whatever is available, whatever makes the absence feel less like absence. What was available to Vivian was the social world of school and peers and the grinding, relentless concern with how things look to other people, that is the specific emotional weather of adolescence. She filled the gap with shame because there was nothing else on offer. No one gave her the truth. No one gave her the real story. No one said to her, "Your mother is blind because of the night you were born, and here is what that means about who your mother is, and here is why it should make you feel not ashamed but honored to be her child." Raymond and Idoreen made a decision with love in it that had consequences they did not intend. This happens in families all the time. Research on family estrangement and parent-child breakdown consistently shows that the wounds that take longest to heal are not the ones caused by cruelty, but the ones caused by protection gone wrong, by the well-intentioned withholding of truth that leaves a child to fill silence with whatever their fear suggests. Nearly 1 in 4 American adults reports being estranged from at least one family member, and the painful thread running through many of those stories is not abuse or neglect, but something quieter and more complicated. The accumulation of things unsaid, the weight of silences that were meant to protect, and instead became walls. What saved the Walker family was not a dramatic intervention. It was not a confrontation or an ultimatum, or a moment of crisis that forced everyone's hand. It was a Saturday afternoon at a front door, and a woman standing alone in a kitchen holding a bowl she had just taken down from the cabinet, and a husband who came home that evening and sat across a dinner table and said, "After all the years and all the silence, there is something I should have told her a very long time ago." The truth, when it finally arrived, was not as destructive as the silence had been. That is the thing that Raymond and Idoreen had feared most about it. That telling Vivian would hurt her, would burden her, would make the blindness into a wound between them, rather than simply a fact of their family's life. What they had not accounted for was that the silence had already made it a wound. The truth did not cause the wound. The truth, arriving late and fully and without softening, was the thing that began, slowly, imperfectly, over time, to heal it. Idoreen, when asked what she wants people to take from her story, says she wants them to understand that sight and seeing are not the same thing, that in 26 years of blindness, she saw her husband more clearly than most sighted wives see their husbands. She saw the world around her more carefully, paid more attention to what it offered, was more present to sound and texture and the warmth of sunlight through a window than she had ever been when she could see those things, and took them for granted as background. And she saw her daughter, saw the fear in her, the shame, the longing, the love that sat underneath all of it and never left, even in the worst of it, saw her in a way that did not require eyes. The lights going out in that delivery room was the hardest thing that ever happened to Idoreen. And her daughter calling her a blind witch at their front door was the second hardest thing. But she would not go back and change either of them, because the one that happened first made her who she is, and the one that happened second, eventually, made them who they are now, and who they are now is worth everything it cost to get there. There is a truth that someone in your life is holding back from you, or there is a truth that you have been holding back from someone in yours, and somewhere between those two people, a silence has been accumulating, filling itself in with whatever is available, becoming a wall neither of you intended to build. Think, after everything this story has shown, about what it would take to say the thing that needs to be said. Not perfectly, not all at once, but to begin, because the truth does not destroy the families that are strong enough to tell it. It is the silence that does that. Slowly, in the dark, over time, the way things always grow that are never allowed into the light. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below telling us what this story made you feel, or what truth it reminded you of that you have been carrying. Every comment is read. Everyone matters. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, please do it now. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. We tell stories here that matter. Stories about what families carry, and the moments that finally let them set it down. We will see you in the next one.